This is the Agile Uprising Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the latest installation of the Agile Uprising Agile Manifesto Author Review. I'm your host, Ryan Lockard. From the Agile Uprising, I am joined by Jason Cusack and Troy Lightfoot. And we are very lucky today to be welcoming Ron Jeffries to the podcast. So thanks for joining us today, Ron.
I'm glad to do it. Glad we finally got a date we can make work.
Yeah, and I appreciate you being so flexible with that. So as we get started here, you are probably one of the most popular members of that Agile Manifesto author group, and your history is very well documented and very well understood. But let's assume we have some listeners that are relatively new into the Agile community and not so familiar with the forefathers of the movement. Would you mind giving us a little bit of a summary of how you were introduced, what you were working on professionally leading up to 2001, and how you got introduced to your cohorts?
Well, we probably don't want to do my whole history since I started programming in 1962. But recently, right before all this stuff started happening, I had been working on a product development effort in Ann Arbor, which had not gone well, actually, and which basically closed out. So I was looking for something to do and posted on various lists that were active at that time, that would have been 1996, posted on the list that I was looking for stuff. And Kent Beck knew me. We had met at OOPSLA conferences and things like that. And he had just had his first visit with Chrysler talking about the C3 project, which had been originally instituted for Chrysler to learn about object-oriented programming. The intention was to write a new payroll program for reasons that mostly had to do with who would fund it, I think. And he had met with Sue Unger, the CIO, and with the team, and had just told her, this project is broken. And she had told him, well, I want you to fix it. And he said, no, you don't understand. I'm just sort of a consultant. I don't fix things. And she said, you don't understand. I'm the CIO of Chrysler. I would like you to fix this. So he wrote me a note and said, hey, does your area code mean that you are in Detroit? And I said, it means I'm close to Detroit. So he invited me in to work on that effort to help coach it, which turned out to be the first extreme programming installation. At that time, extreme programming didn't exist or have a name, but he put together a process that he had in mind for how it would be done, which subsequently got named extreme programming. While that was going on, so I was, that's where I really kind of learned what Agile ideas were. That's my first introduction. But I got to know other people in the community. I had already met Ward Cunningham, probably had met Alistair at some of the conferences and so on. And I got active on Ward's wiki talking about what we were doing because I was so excited about it. That wasn't necessarily popular with the wiki people who were trying to do patterns, but it really got a lot of the word out about extreme programming and Agile. And so, over the course of the next 4 years, I, met Bob Martin and Martin Fowler, who was in fact with us on the C3 project. There had been a lot of talk about we ought to get together and have a meeting, because at this time all that stuff was called lightweight methods, and nobody really wanted to be known as lightweights. So we knew we needed to do something. There was a plan originally to meet on Big Dave Thomas's island where it would be nice and pleasant, but that fell through. So somehow Bob Martin and Alistair decided to have the thing at Snowbird. And so in a way, I was just kind of in the right place at the right time over both from getting on the C3 project and then getting invited to this thing.
When you say getting invited, do you remember, did somebody reach out to Kent and then Kent asked you, or did you get contacted directly, or was it something through the wiki?
If I recall, I was contacted directly because I had been very, very, very active on the wiki. And so I was already getting infamous for my views on this stuff because, I'd been, at the time that happened, I'd been doing software for 30 years, more to 35 probably. And so I sort of knew a good thing when I saw it. And as I had seen this stuff beginning to work out and how such a light approach, such an iterative approach was better than anything I'd been doing for decades, I was pretty noisy about it. So we had Alistair out to visit us, as a matter of fact, at the conference. And so my recollection is he reached out to me directly, not through Kent.
Yeah, I struggle to see you having a strong opinion on things. It's such a foreign concept.
Yeah, it's rare, I know, for me to actually be anything other than quite centered on all these things.
So you had, I'm doing this one from memory, so forgive me, but I believe you already had your first book published by 2001?
It was right about that time. I don't remember exactly what the dates were, but Kent's book and the Pink book came out right about that era. I don't remember if it was before or after Snowbird.
It's incredible. Even last night, I was talking to somebody about a position I have open on my team for a developer. And that book still today, even by people that were probably still in grade school when it was published, point to that as one of their Bibles, one of the things that they look at as what inspires them to be a better craftsperson in the world of software. So
that's good to hear. Chet and I often talk about, should we, do another edition? Should we revise it? What would we say differently that we've learned over the last 10 years? Since it's basically 20 years since that project started and 15 years since that book came out. So it's good to know that people still read it. We do actually occasionally, actually every quarter, we still get a little bitty royalty for that book, $200. So issues are still selling.
Yeah.
I think that means that, somewhere between 20 and 50 issues sell every quarter. It's not exactly going to put us on the New York Times bestseller list.
So you get the email, you find out that you're not going to Dave Thomas's island out in the Caribbean. You guys are going to instead go for the other end of the extreme and hit a ski resort in Utah. So take yourself back to that time, as you're pulling up to the resort, I imagine you're getting closer and closer. Did you travel alone, or were you with any of your seats?
I don't remember. I have the general recollection that I must have met somebody at the airport. I don't think, unless Martin flew on the same flight as I did, nobody else would have. And I don't think Martin was in Michigan at that time. But I recall driving up to the resort in a van kind of a thing, and I think there were a couple of other guys in there. And by then I knew Bob, and I knew Alistair, and I knew James Grenning, and a number of the folks.
Was there? And you're actually leading into the next question. As you guys got there, and I believe it was the night before the first scheduled day, you all had sort of an informal gathering. Was there anyone in there that, either by way of the phone calls that led up to it, the news group, the wiki, is there anyone that you were not familiar with, at least saying, "Oh, that's so and so"? Was there any brand newcomers that you were some?
I think I certainly didn't know of Ari. I'd have to look through the list and see who else I didn't know. I was aware of Miller, but I don't think I had met him. Who are the other suspects? I should go to the website and look up the list.
There's a pretty famous picture on the background.
Yeah, right, of me in a profile, not a good look. So I knew some of the people fairly well. I knew Kent pretty well because we'd worked together so much on C3, and I had been at conferences with the others. I'd had a few days of consulting with Ward. I wouldn't say I knew any of them well or was deep friends with them before this or now, really, because I have like one deep friend and she's at work at the moment.
So the first day you guys get together in that conference room, and from what I understand, there was no Alistair, I believe, put together some type of loose agenda or talking points that got distributed before. And John Kern actually gave us his copy that he had.
I saw his little write-up thing.
Yeah. So I think that was the original attempt at getting some sort of semblance of an agenda together. But what I learned was pretty quickly that fell apart. And what sort of emerged was you guys getting together, and as Alistair put it, those damn XP guys had all these index cards ready to go. And you started writing down ideas on cards and tossing them into the center of the room. Does that seem to sound familiar at all? You have index cards at the ready at all times.
With my logo on them. My recollection is that it was in no sense a formal meeting, and that most, other than the time spent eating and drinking and looking at the snow, most of the effort was in that room where that picture's taken in front of that board.
Yeah.
Arguing, talking, and bouncing things around. Kind of just trying to get a sense of what common beliefs we had. As you know, I myself am quite modest and unassuming, but there were a lot of egos in that room. And a lot of specific angles on how things should be done. Schwaber and Sutherland, of course, had a method that they'd been using since the mid-'80s, and so they certainly had their angle on it. Kent was forming XP and making it be the method that he thought should be there. So there was plenty of give and take of that kind. But there are other angles. The DSDM is really quite a large method compared to the other approaches. And so that angle kind of bounced around. I recall a certain amount of trouble with Stephen Mellor, because we kept talking about writing software, and that wasn't what he was about. He was about more of an automatic software generation from a specification. Automating the Schleyer-Mellor method was kind of what I think he had in mind. And so he would always try and push us in a direction that would allow his idea to be part of this, rather than he didn't want it to be separated off and say, if you're not coding in C, it doesn't even count or anything like that. He wanted that. So there was that kind of tension in the room about different pulls. And then Highsmith, of course, I suspect he was probably the consultant at the highest level in corporations who was present. He consults, consult with management and executives and stuff like that. And so he was interested in the same topics, but from the angle of being a business side consultant rather than a development side consultant, which most of us were. So there were topics in the room that pulled us back and forth, and a certain amount of jostling that had to take place. I don't recall any real tension or acrimony, but you put any two of us in a room, and we'll have 5 different opinions and have to support them. So it was just an awful lot of give and take and talking and trying to figure stuff out.
So I'm going to assume that one of your prime objectives was to talk about XP and how we could proliferate the concepts behind XP. Is that a safe assumption, or did you have a different top priority?
I don't. First of all, it was a long time ago, and I don't remember what my priority was. But I don't think that was ever quite my priority because it was already understood that extreme programming was not a brand like Scrum, that it was released into the world, that Kent Beck was not going to trademark it, not going to copyright it. And so it was a set of ideas that anybody could adopt and have be out there. Now, I think the thing that I liked about it and still like about it is that it's the method that talked about how you actually build software. Mm-hmm. Scrum is a framework for building anything, really, and you could build software with it, and most people do. SDM is a giant process that you could do things with. There really weren't kind of any big named possibilities in there. There were Alistair's crystal methods, which I don't remember whether those were well formulated or not, but he has his anthropological approach, but that never was a method that seemed, competing in any way. I didn't really want there to be competing. Mm-hmm. You want to remember, this is before 9/11, and my belief is that when the economy started to go weird after 9/11, that caused competition among those individuals. Now, those individuals were all egomaniacs, and so there's going to be competition anyway. But I think that the method wars really were subsequent to the Manifesto meeting, not so present during it. At least so it seemed to me.
Do you recall what you would have written on one of those index cards then? I mean, maybe not your top priority, but just one of the areas of passion that you wanted to get in the agenda?
Well, I imagine that I would have been most interested in what turned out to be like the working software phrase that occurs again and again. Probably in the beginning, I would guess I probably really wanted all of the practices of XP, on the table. You can see the echoes of some of those in the manifesto and in the principles, but it became clear quite early that we were going to be able to say some general things, but we were not going to be able to agree on any hardline specifics, like whether or not you should do test-driven development. But I don't, I have almost no major agenda ever. I like to argue, and whenever the topic is in the meeting, I will have an opinion, and I will support that opinion. But I really don't have long-term objectives that would translate into an agenda of the meeting like that. I wasn't trying to push Scrum. I thought XP was wonderful, and I was going to talk about it wherever I went, but it wasn't like a business for me. So I think I was much more in a mode of talk about whatever we're going to talk about, and I will figure out what my position is and support it. But I don't think I had anything in mind as the result of this meeting, so much as just let's have a productive meeting and see what we get out of it.
Right. So you mentioned earlier the set of practices that kind of bound you all together was referred to as lightweight practices or lightweight methodologies. And we talked about the notes that John Kern made available to us. And in there, it's littered with LWP and LWM. One area that I believe some of the others had mentioned that there was I'm not going to say an argument, but at least a heated conversation was around the label for this, because nobody wanted lightweight. I believe Jim Highsmith was a fan of adaptive, and eventually Agile emerged. Does that seem familiar at all, or has that memory escaped?
It does. I don't remember anybody really pushing for a particular word so much as seeking. And I do believe Jim probably pushed adaptive because that was sort of already his brand name. Mm-hmm. I don't remember that the Scrum guys wanted even to have Scrum be in the name of it. They wanted a different name because Scrum was their little baby, and they weren't interested in having us all suddenly, take our random ideas and call it Scrum. I don't remember who originally said Agile. I think somebody has told you who they thought originally picked the word Agile, but it rather quickly, to my recollection, caught on in the sense that we all said, that's a good word. We were mistaken to think it was a good word, but we all thought, yeah, that's a word, people will want to do that, and it sounds like something desirable. It was pretty clear that you didn't want to call it extreme.
So why do you say it wasn't, in retrospect, it wasn't such a good word?
It's too desirable. Everybody wants to be agile, which means everybody wants to say that they're agile, which means everybody wants to describe whatever it is they do as agile. And that has resulted, in my opinion, in the term not meaning anything. In term, the blood has been squoze out of that, and now you have, for example, a scaled agile method that's as big as RUP, and you can call yourself agile whatever you do. So, have you talked to Brian Merrick yet?
No, we have recently. Yes.
Did he mention his proposed name for Agile, the retro fusional, whatever it is? We got to look that up.
I'm ringing a bell if you did.
He at one point well, you never know with Brian, but I assume in jest, made up a really hideous 4-word amalgam name that we should have called Agile so that it would not be a desirable name.
I believe he did. I don't know if it made the recording. I do remember this now.
You have to look it up to get it right. Only he knows what it is. Yeah. But at the time, it seemed like, yeah, this is a good name, and it'll be popular, and people will want to be agile. And it seemed like a decent name, and it seemed like it described what we were trying to do, which was to be adaptable, to move swiftly, make a probe, find out what was going on, adjust path. It seemed like a good name, and so my recollection is that it converged fairly quickly. But
yeah.
I don't really do recollection, so it's hard to be sure.
Another question I have, Ron, is because you had said that from a competition perspective that no one was really in competition and everyone was kind of doing their own thing. Do you think that? Did you guys get together just for the sake of learning or for the sake of kind of debating how things would get better? Or did you have intentions of trying to make your life easier at the job that you had, right? Trying to convince management that there might be a better way to go about building software?
I don't think I had that view. I do think the overall view was, hey, we're all kind of doing the same thing in our arena. Why don't we try and line up and have it be more of a movement, have it be more of a direction that we're all going? At that time, I don't remember whether I was still at Chrysler or had just left Chrysler. In either case, I didn't think of this as a business. I still don't think of it as a business for me. It's just a thing I do, and that people sometimes give me money to do. But I think there was a general feeling that, hey, we're all doing the same thing. Why don't we see if we can give it a name that will carry it forward and, give it a house to live in. And that group invented the word Agile Alliance, although it seems that the Agile Alliance belongs to somebody else now.
Do you guys wish you had maybe taken a different approach? Because even when you talk about whether you talk about that scaling framework that do evoke a certain type of emotion, where you look at Scrum, we haven't said Kanban, we haven't said discipline agile delivery, we haven't talked about the cadre of people from IBM. Do you guys wish that maybe you had gone back and maybe done something a little bit different to make it more of a business?
I don't, because I have no desire whatsoever to be in a business. I just do stuff that seems entertaining. I believe that historically, I mean, people have done businesses. Bob Martin had his company and has whatever he's doing now. Ken Schwaber has always been interested in making money with Scrum. I don't think either of those guys, who I think of as being the most like building a business, I don't think those guys wanted or would want a strong umbrella to be part of. It's more like a little bit more, the style was a little bit more like an industry association. Back then there was a small talk industry association that a lot of us belonged to, and it was, it's just kind of a marketing club that, allegedly is going to do something for everybody, but it's more just a kind of a place to hang out. So I don't think I wish that it had been made more business-like. I do, and I'm not allowed to go back on my own timeline because it causes all kinds of trouble, but I wish that we had been able to retain some of the elements, particularly of extreme programming, that are mostly lost in the average Agile installation. I remember that Kent Beck, at one point back about then, said that what he had in mind with extreme programming was to make the world safe for programmers. And I believe that what we are seeing today is that Agile is not making the world safe for programmers. And the name SAFE is a perfect example of that. The Agile ideas are too often adopted as words that we say as managers that enable us to say, aha, you programmers, you have to do stuff every week, because it says here in the Agile book that you have to do stuff every week, and you have to give us your estimates, and you have to do all these things, and it's almost oppressive. And I have a few articles up on my website with more to come about what I call dark Scrum. Mm-hmm. Scrum that has actually turned out to be a tool of oppression rather than a tool of liberation. And the fundamental idea of this stuff is that if you empower your team to make more decisions about how to do what they need, you keep them informed on what you need, they figure out how to do it, that they'll be more productive, you'll get more output, and as it turns out, the people doing the work will be more happy because they get purpose, autonomy, and mastery, which is what it takes for people to do work to be happy. So I wish we had been able to retain that focus on the people and on the practices that support that. But I believe that all good ideas get watered down in this fashion. That over time, if an idea becomes popular, it also just gets watered down and the ripples are lower and lower and lower. And, there's some people who get it and many people who do not.
That's interesting you say that. That actually takes me back to the very first interview we did with John Kern. He said something extraordinarily similar to what you just said, and he used the metaphor of democracy. He's I'm sure you know this, he's a big U.S. history buff, and he talked about how over time every idea gets convoluted, and pointed towards the government for that one. You mentioned, first of all, Dark Scrum. Those articles are absolutely wonderful. I love those articles, and the fact that there's more coming is exciting. You mentioned that some of the XP practices are not in use or not widely in use. Which ones do you look at as the ones that are most commonly not in place that should be?
Well, I would take a half a step back. I think that the main thing that is not in use in many Agile installations is the notion of producing running tested software every sprint, every iteration, that you are supposed to deliver software that does what the product owner or customer wanted, demonstrably does it, and is all put together, and here it is, here's some software, have some. And if you do that, you change the conversation. You are no longer in a mode where they say, how long is this going to take? And you say, probably another 6 months. And they say, how are you doing? And you say, really good. And they say, well, you said you were really good last week. You're not really very good. And they start pulling you up by the roots and seeing how you're doing. If every couple of weeks you actually give them software, you get to say, look, here's what we've done. Look at the history. This is how rapidly we're going. Every one of these periods, we gave you something you asked for, and we're doing it in the order you asked us to do it. Now, to accomplish that delivery of an increment, what Scrum calls an increment, you have to do certain things. You can't get the design right in the first 2 weeks. And you're not allowed to take 6 months to get the design right. You have to ship software in 2 weeks, which means you must evolve the design. You must refactor the system as you learn about the design. Well, if you're going to refactor the system, that means changing the software design without breaking the functionality. The only way we know that we haven't broken the functionality is to have tests. So we have to have automated acceptance tests, because otherwise manual testing would just take longer and longer and longer, and you'd run out of time. So the key XP practices of test-driven development, acceptance test-driven development, refactoring, are, as far as I can tell up until today, essentially necessary if you're going to actually ship an increment again and again and again. I don't know of another way to do it. You can try, but sooner or later your design goes off the rails. Sooner or later your code doesn't work anymore because you made some massive change. And I don't get to see what's really happening in the industry. I get to see who shows up at my classes. I get to see the companies I consult with. And if a company were doing perfect extreme programming, they wouldn't call me in. So I get called into companies who are troubled in one way or another, who are just starting out. So I, of course, see, only one side of things, the side where stuff's not going on. I'm told that in the UK, there's a lot of very strong extreme programming going on. I haven't been over there to look into that, but I'm told that there's a lot of that happening out of London and other spots.
That's interesting. My wife is actually British, so I get to go to the UK often. And when I go, I try to work with some of the local Agile teams over there and the groups and such. And they generally look at the US as the stronger of the XP countries and the general Agile practitioners. So I think
maybe it's just the other side of the grass. Huh?
Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say.
Do you know Rachel Davies?
I know of Rachel Davies. I've read her book.
You'd want to hook with her and see what's up. She's pretty well plugged into the XP structure. So maybe sometime when you're over there, you can get with her and find out what she's looking at.
Perfect. So without probably trying to condense a full week session with you into a sentence, I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. A lot of times when you're working with a company that's in a state of disarray, we're not talking about a greenfield project. We're talking about legacy code, probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lines of an application. How do you approach starting test-driven development or starting automated unit tests and such? It almost seems like you can't see the forest through the trees without using the cliche.
You cannot. What I believe works, and I think the only thing that works, is for the team to decide deeply, we need unit tests, we need to be able to refactor, we need to know we haven't broken the system, and to decide we're going to do whatever we have to do to accomplish that. The way that I think you can best learn that you need that is to experience it in a greenfield kind of a situation. So when Chet and I teach a developers class, we do an application from scratch and we do 90-minute iterations and we make them pair program and we make them do TDD and we make them do refactoring. And over the course of a week, they will invariably slack on one or the other of those things, and they will have a 90-minute iteration in which they can't deliver anything. And they are startled because they all think they're all smart people, and they can't make it work. And when they have a retrospective, they realize we didn't keep our design up, and our design won't support things. We have to get our design better. And so what we're trying to do in that class is to begin to get built into their beliefs that we really need to accomplish this. Then when you go back home, you can begin to accomplish it. And if the program is too horrible legacy, well, you may be just doomed. But if it is, the project will terminate soon and they'll start a new greenfield one because that project's going to die. If I want to do legacy refactoring, I want to look at Michael Feather's book. That is still the one, the only, the best book on how to refactor legacy code. It's not that hard to start building in tests. You build a characterization test that just surrounds a big chunk of the system and checks to make sure that nothing is broken. You do things. But mostly it just takes pecking away, and that requires, I believe, a deep belief that this is a good thing to do, because I'm undisciplined, and so I assume everybody's undisciplined. I won't do testing because I'm disciplined. I do it because I've learned that I program better when I do it. And I believe that, and I know it. And so even when I'm in a situation where I can't figure out how to do it, I'm always aware of the risk I'm taking. And so what I think people have to do is they have to experience it. And so a big organization, a legacy organization, one of the many reasons why Agile is going to be difficult to get into those places is that it's very difficult to experience it. And I think only by experiencing it can you really come to like it.
It's interesting. One of the things that came up recently when we spoke with Jeff, and something personally I believe everyone on this call has been exposed to, is in our bones, we can know that is the right way to develop software and to deliver technical products. The impasse usually comes when you start dealing with corporate leadership and convincing them of the better way to deliver these products and to create value. When you go through your coaching or when you go through your engagements, are you typically working at the development layer, or are you also working with the C-suite, the execs?
It depends. I've worked all the way up and down the chain. The story that you want to tell is different at those levels. I will mention at a C level the technical practices, not to justify them so much as to say, okay, here's the deal. You guys, what you need to do in order to do Agile is you need to demand from your teams that they show you working, improved, integrated software every couple of weeks. And then we talk about why. Well, why that'll be useful to you. Because instead of them giving you random number estimates, you actually see results, and the results are better, and so you're happy. And so I say you have to demand that. In order to demand that, I go on and say they're going to have to learn to do certain things, because they can't build software that way by the seat of their pants and then debug it 6 months later. They've got to have it debugged every 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. So they have to learn these practices, mention the practices. And you should expect that they will have to learn that. And you should expect to have to invest in helping them learn that, because most of them won't know it. They don't. This is not something you learned in school. It's not something you learned when you suddenly went into programming because your job in food services turned out to suck. These are things you don't just automatically know. And so I prep the C people to be aware that this stuff needs to go on, because I want them to support it. At the developer level, my fundamental position is I don't ask permission to do my testing. I don't ask permission to refactor. I don't ask permission to do any of that stuff any more than I would ask permission to use an if statement or a for loop. This is the way programmers program. And I don't go to management and say, can we refactor our code as we develop it? It's like, why would you ask that? Why would you ask whether you can use for loops? That's not a question they're equipped to answer. Now, you do see situations where the team wants to say, this design is so horrible, we need to take not the amount of time and refactor it. that is, in my opinion, invariably a bad idea. First of all, they won't let you do it because you say, well, we could give you 5 more features, or we could refactor it for a month and then maybe be able to give you 6 features in a month instead of 5. And they're like, I'll take the 5 features because I want features and I don't care about your damn refactoring. So if you ask the question, the answer is almost always going to be no. In addition, any design, in my opinion, any design improvement that can be made in small steps. There is no reason to say, I've got to stop all development and improve the code for a month. No, why don't you just improve the code a little bit every day? You don't have to blanket replace all this stuff, usually. Now, if you want to go to a new platform, you go to a new platform for business reasons. You don't go because the programmers suddenly think Python's a really good idea. It is, but, well, you don't listen to that. So I prep the managers to know that it's going to happen, and I try and prep the team not to do big refactorings and not to say, we want to go and do testing for a month. I have some very serious war stories about that. I was consulting with an outfit out in California that was trying to do Agile and doing a pretty good job with it. And one of the Agile team managers had negotiated with his management to take, if I'm not mistaken, 3 months and beef up the testing on their application with no new features. They were probably doing emergency releases, but no new development. Well, 2 bad things happened. The first bad thing that happened was when I first started working with the team, I saw really bad behavior. I remember one time I was sitting with some guy and we were working on something. We put a test in, we did some work, and another guy came over and the guy I was programming with said, "Hi, Joe. We put in a bunch of tests on that thing that we talked about the other day." And Joe said, "Okay, but I get the credit." Turns out the manager was measuring his people by how many tests they wrote. Well, hey, if I'm going to be measured by how many tests I wrote, I can write a computer program that'll write all the tests you want. You want 1,000? I can give them to you by tomorrow morning. So it was generating bad behavior within the team. But the other thing that happened was that before 90 days were up, the company reorganized, and they reorganized that manager right out of the job because he hadn't been producing anything. So I believe you have to always balance production that the business side people can see and improving the code, improving the tests, improving the design. So I try to prep management because I know they're going to hear about it, and I try to prep the team to never have to ask the question.
As I heard the last 5 to 7 minutes of you talking, I realized I need to trim this entire show and just capture that 5 to 7 minute clip, learn how to put that into my own language, and start sharing that more and completely plagiarize you.
The last question I wanted to ask you, and I know that this has been a pursuit of yours on Twitter because I follow you pretty diligently, but it's about diversity and inclusion. And one of the things when you look back at the group from the Manifesto is that you look at the picture, they're all white guys.
Old white guys, yes.
Right. At some point, was there a curator of that list? Was that something that you guys would have done differently, given that it wasn't like it was 1980 and there was, not that many women in tech. It was 2011. You would think that there would be at least a group of people to pick from. Did that ever come up?
I don't recall it coming up at the time. I recall it coming up later. As far as I know, the list was somewhere between Alistair and Bob Martin. But I don't know that for sure. It's easy enough to name a few women who should have been there. That said, there were not, there's plenty of women programming, but there were not then, and may not even be now, many women who were pushing Agile forward, or whatever, what was to become Agile. We probably should have had Mary Poppendieck there because she was active in a close enough realm. I don't remember that I knew of Mary at that time. but she's been vocal enough since then that she should have been there because maybe she wouldn't be quite so much at an angle, in particular with the Scrum people. And I think we would have benefited from a particular part of her beliefs, which has to do with an objection she has to her interpretation of the Scrum idea of the product owner. Scrum thinks of the product owner as the person who knows what should be done and basically has the list. She thinks more in a 3M style, where the product is championed by somebody who comes in and says, hey, we got to do this thing for these people, but the team figures out what has to be done as well as how to do it. I think that the fundamental structure of Agile is about pushing decisions closer and closer to the team and into the team and, closer to the ground. And so I think she's right about that. Had she been there, that might have come up more, might have grabbed a stronger foothold. I remember Kent Beck once said that in XP there's the team and there's the customer, equivalent to the product owner in Scrum, and that he felt that was a flaw, that there were those two things, but that he could not see a way to get rid of it. And I think the way to get rid of it is more along the lines of what Mary talks about. You have a product champion, that you have a person in the business who's doing this and held responsible, but that they aren't the decision maker so much as the provider of need, provider of contact with people with needs, and the supporter of the decisions. So I think we would have gotten some of that. At that time, I can't think of another woman, or for that matter, people from other countries or races that I was aware of that should have been there. There probably were they're not coming to my mind. Certainly since then, we all agree it would have been nice if it wasn't quite so many old white guys.
I think one final question for you, Ron. It is, however we want to look at it, Agile is a growing business. There are people coming in every single day in droves. For anyone that listens to and respects you, what is one of the prevalent wishes you have for those that are just now entering the Agile community and starting to practice?
Well, my interest is mostly aimed at developers. I think of myself as a software developer. I wrote code this morning. And so my focus is on those people. A lot of what's showing up in Agile now is other important matters. People figuring out, how do you do the product ownership job? People figuring out, how do you get people to work well together? Just the people cooperating with each other kind of a thing. And those are important things. And most of us who got into programming didn't get into it so that we could, hang out with people and, be real people. And so I don't want to underemphasize those things as resources that programmers should go to. But my real interest is, as Beck put it, making the world safe for programmers. For those people, for people who are going into an Agile or a would-be Agile situation, I think I would have them focus on producing an increment of real live tested software and learning the technical practices underneath that it takes to do that. But that's a very narrow focus. It's, my interest is in those guys doing that stuff, those programmers who are actually building the stuff. My focus is on the makers, not on the managers and the marketers.
It's sadly becoming the underrepresented group, so it's good.
It is, I think, and that I think is in part where Bob Martin's craftsmanship thing is coming from. Is that those people need that kind of help. He has probably some other agendas as well, but it's a good effort to say, look, you guys got to know how to do this. Agile has become a management approach, has become something that you sell at the highest corporate levels, and we have to train all your people, and that's important. But I very much support what Steve Denning is doing in his articles for Forbes, recognizing you got to get an Agile mindset into the corporation. But my deal is, day in and day out, there's programmers out there who could have a better life if they could, one, learn some techniques that they may not know, and then two, learn how to bring concrete software to their management and say, look, let's talk about this instead of talking about our estimates and actuals.
Okay. So how can people get a hold of you if they want to reach out, if they're interested in some of your training or offerings?
Well, I don't know. I in a way, I sort of think if you can't find me, you don't deserve me. But ronjeffries.com is, of course, my website. And my email address is ronjeffries@acm.org. And I'm on Twitter as Ron Jeffries. Do not confuse yourself with the other Ron Jeffries, who is my son who makes beer. As I say, I think if you want me, you can find me.
Well, thank you very much, sir.